Welcome to week 4, the final week of Rewild Your Womb, and this video about the creative process and the menstrual cycle. So we're going to be looking into the parallels between the menstrual cycle and anything that we're wanting to create in our lives, whether that's a book or a painting, a business, a home, a family, whatever it is that we're putting energy into to manifest in our life. We can benefit from learning from the phases of the menstrual cycle and bringing this into our creative process. So I will be talking about creativity broadly speaking. So if you don't think of yourself as an artist, a creative artist, a musician, a painter or something like that, this is just as applicable to you in whatever area of your life you are working and living. So we can look at these patterns and how they play out in not only our day-to-day lives, but also the broader phases of our lives and our life journey as a whole, as I touched on in the call last night. And basically what's happening in each of these cycles, each of these creative cycles, is the same two energy currents that we looked at in week 1 of the course, the via negativa and the via positiva. So the via negativa meaning the energy where we create by going inwards and receiving, seeing what comes towards us, yielding and surrendering. And the via positiva being the energy where we create through using our will and action and doing things. So within these two different energy currents, there are the same 4 phases as the menstrual cycle, but with a different emphasis. So similarly to the pre-ovulation stage or spring, in the creative process, we have the initiate phase, which is when we're getting started with something. And we then move into the manifest phase, which corresponds to our ovulation time or our summer. And this is the time of being productive and producing content or projects or really making visible results in whatever it is that we're creating. And this is followed by the discern phase of the creative process, which is similar to the autumn or premenstrual phase, where we are refining whatever it is we've been creating. And finally, there's the potentize phase, which corresponds to inner winter and menstruation, a time where we find fresh meaning and inspiration and direction in our work through letting go of it, through stepping back from it. So I'm going to go into more detail now about each of those phases. So in initiation, we are working with the seed idea of our creative project. And this is about playing with an idea and seeing what it is, when we want to do it, and how it's going to be. And all of these possibilities open up before us, none of which are yet nailed down to anything definite. So it's a time to experiment and take risks, just as in the spring season of our menstrual cycle. Rather than getting too serious about what we're creating, we are simply letting ourselves play with the ideas. And there's a lot of freedom and spontaneity in this time, but there's also a need for some focus so that we can contain the energy and start to really see what it is that we have the potential to create here. It's important to start getting things moving as well as to give it space and to not put any pressure on at this stage. So for example, if you were writing a book, this would be the time to just open the blank page in your journal or on your computer and to start writing down whatever comes, who the characters are, what kind of themes you want to explore, just whatever comes without a need for order and structure and being linear. This is the time to just let it all come out. If you were creating, let's say you had moved house or moved to a new area and were starting a new home, this would be the phase of starting to experiment and explore what you need this space to be. You might still have a fair amount of chaos in this stage of lots of boxes and things around you and not quite knowing where everything's going to land yet, but already you can start to see, oh, that might look good over there and I think I need a pot plant in that room, or maybe I want to get some decoration for this part of the room. And it's a time to to have this innocent, playful curiosity about what can be in the space. And just as in our internal spring, in our menstrual cycle, it's really important to cherish our ideas and hold them closely to us rather than exposing them to the light of day too soon. So if you do feel you're bubbling over with enthusiasm with a new idea or project, at this stage, in the initiate stage, it's important to only share that with people that you know will be supportive, not critical, people who will just give you that helpful affirmation. And you can ask for that quite directly and say, I only would like positive feedback at this stage. I just want to share my excitement, and I don't want to yet hear what might not work about it. And a good friend will understand that and respond to it. Then there's the next phase of creation, which is manifest. And this is where we really start to get on with things. We move from this embryonic, playful, risk-taking, experimental space to starting to make things more concrete and real. And this, of course, corresponds to our inner summer, where one of our sacred tasks is to say yes. So at this stage, we say yes to our project. We really commit to it, become quite firm about it, create space for it in our lives, where we're regularly putting time into it in our schedule and prioritizing it to some degree. So this is when we can open to a state of flow, where the project or the creativity seems to just take on a life of its own. This is the time when the words, if we're writing a book, the words are just pouring onto the page, and we're putting in some serious time into it and writing several pages at a time, for example. Or in the house moving analogy, we've now got everything in its place, and we're starting to really feel that sense of satisfaction of, okay, this is becoming a home now, and I'm starting to feel like I've landed somewhere. I'm starting to feel like I know where I am, even though there's still more to do. The energy of this phase has a way of carrying us so that it almost feels like the project is doing us, the work is doing us, rather than us needing to do very much, even if we are putting the concrete action in. And that's the state of effortless flow that can happen if we just take our foot off the brake and let it proceed and let it go with its own momentum. So the manifest phase is followed by the discernment phase, corresponding to the inner autumn, which is our premenstrual time, where, as we've touched on before a little bit, but we will go into more deeply later this week, the inner critic makes her most visible appearance. The inner critic can, of course, come up at any time. When she comes up in spring, in the early stage of a creative project, or in our menstrual cycle, it's important to protect our idea, protect ourselves from this energy, which can be so critical. And basically what it is, as we explored in the meditation last night, is this energy of the parts of us that are never satisfied. No matter how well we do something, you'll always find something to criticize about it. So it can never really be perfect enough for the inner critic. So just accepting that in itself is going to go a long way. But at this point of the creative process, it can be quite destabilizing potentially, because one moment we're going full steam ahead in the manifest phase and everything is flowing. And then there's an interruption point where suddenly things can look really different. Maybe we feel like we've hit a wall or a block, a writer's block if you're writing a book, or feeling like you start to question, have I moved to the right town? Is this house really what I want? Was it a good idea to leave where I was before? And suddenly all the questions come up and the wonderings about whether what you're doing is really what you want and whether it's good enough. And this is the time to really look more closely at what you've created and to embrace this power of discernment rather than pushing it away and being afraid of it. Because it's like you've come down off the high of that via positiva, and you're now going more inward and looking at how you can refine and improve what you have, a bit like polishing a diamond until it is really shining. This is the time for feedback, to let others have a look at your work, to let people come into your house and have a look. And it may be quite vulnerable. It can be very exposing. But at this time, we are able to see what can be done to shift things in the direction of the ultimate vision that we have, and accepting that that vision is always going to be an ideal. We're never going to fully reach it because there is no such thing as perfection. So this is the stage to prune your work, to edit, to clean up things, to see what is fluffy and needs to go. You know, like if you've created a website, maybe you go through it and see that there are a lot of words there that aren't necessary, or pictures that don't quite represent you. And that's when you would feel the clear sight to eliminate that and to just get more specific and sparing and ruthless even about what you put out into the world. So finally, after this stage, we reach the potentize phase of the creative process, which corresponds to inner winter or menstruation time. And this is the time to walk away from our project. We may have felt like walking away during the discernment phase, because it can be so painful to face that inner critic and so confronting to see all the things that aren't perfect. It would be easy to give up. But there is an art and skill to learning to hold that inner critic within yourself and work with it consciously, which we'll look at more on Sunday, so that it doesn't capsize your project and you keep going. And then at the potentize stage, it really is time to step back and take a break. And you'll know that you've got there when you really reach a wall that you can't go any further with. In the discernment phase, there's still a lot of energy to keep refining. There's like almost a compulsion to keep editing and refining, I find, when I'm working on my writing projects. But at this point, it suddenly just feels like the energy is going. That maybe you want to rest, maybe you feel that you've lost the inspiration for the project, you're maybe not seeing the meaning in it anymore at this moment. But actually what's happening under the surface, just like in menstruation and inner winter, where we seem to go quiet and still on the outside, but actually so much is happening inside. In this phase, we are making the power within our work and our creativity much more available. We're potentizing it, making it more potent. And this is about opening to the true meaning and inspiration under this work. So that we connect with the why, we connect with a larger vision and open up to another vision that will take our project into its next round, its next creative phase, because some projects will only go through one round of this whole 4 phases, and others will have several of these built into them. If you're working on something really big, you could have several cycles like this. So you might come to this potentized phase and be inspired with some fresh juice for the next creative phase. Or it might be that this is when you really complete the project and you step away and you let it go into the world, or you let it go into your life. And how do you do this? Just the same as in menstruation and inner winter. You walk away, you drop the bundle, and you let go. And that might be for a few hours, it might be for a few days, weeks, or even months with certain projects. And that's because now you're allowing something deeper to emerge that can't be seen if we just keep doing and doing. We need to stop. We need to let go. And that's a shift. It's like a 360-degree turn from being focused and driven to being receptive. Turning towards the via negativa, where creation happens through allowing rather than forcing. And letting there be a void, letting there be emptiness, letting there be a sense of, I don't know why I'm doing this anymore. What is the point? And it takes a lot of trust to do this, to really let your project speak to you, to let whatever is being created in your life let you know what the next step is, rather than trying to work it out with your mind. And this is where the renewal comes from, the fresh insights, sometimes as if out of nowhere, which are a clear indication of how to move forward with either the next phase of this project or the next phase of your life. So I just want to speak to a commonality between both the initiate phase and the discernment phase, and that is that in both of these phases we are holding tension, just as in spring and in autumn we are holding an internal tension. In the initiate phase, as in spring, the tension is to allow our enthusiasm and excitement for these new ideas to come without pushing and forcing and without getting carried away with it, and just letting ourselves be gentle and moving tenderly, rather than getting into a state where we attach too much goal orientation to what it is we're doing, to just keep that playful, light attitude. And that can be quite a challenge, to be delicate with ourselves. And in the discernment phase, the tension that we're holding is that we often feel we're bumping up against these critical voices that tell us to give up and to walk away, and that there's no point in what we're doing. But if we are able to hold this tension without reacting to it, without collapsing and giving up, we create so much spaciousness within our beings that can then be the space for more creative birthings in our lives, and from which more insight and clarity can also emerge. So through this process, you come to trust your own authority, your own timing, and your own wisdom. And this will benefit all creative projects that you bring into being in your life from then on. So we can use each phase of our menstrual cycle to practice and get familiar with these 4 creative phases in our lives. And remembering that none of these phases can be skipped without an effect on the rest of them. Just as in the menstrual cycle, if any of our seasons are not fulfilled and not fully lived, are somehow feeling incomplete, this can have a knock-on effect on the whole rest of the cycle, and we then need to work to repair that. Sometimes in life we find ourselves in a place where we are in a creative phase that is in contradiction to the menstrual phase that we're in, the menstrual season. So for example, we might be in inner autumn in our menstrual cycle, going inward, not feeling so sociable, not feeling so resilient perhaps. But in our life, outwardly, we are in a spring initiate phase where we've just started a new job and we need to learn the ropes, and we need to be really on it, and also be okay with making mistakes, because that's inevitable, learning a new thing, and okay with asking questions and taking risks. So it's important when this happens to just have a lot of compassion for ourselves and recognize that we're simultaneously in 2 places, and to accept this with grace. Always your menstrual cycle will be the most dominant tone of your being in the given time, because that's our kind of hormonal atmosphere within us. But it's also important to notice what cycle we're in outwardly. There are also the broader cycles in our lives, like the spring when we were in our adolescent years, the summer when we were as adult women, particularly through the motherhood phases, whether you become a mother of a child or not, mothering, creating projects in our lives. And in autumn is the phase post-menopause, and during and post-menopause, and finally in winter, old age. So these phases, we can also be aware of where we're at in our life and how that will affect our energy and how much energy we have to bring to our creative projects. So for example, if you were in an autumn phase of your life, it would be important to notice that you're going to be more discerning, and you're going to be probably giving your energy to only the most important things and fewer things possibly, because you have that really clear sight of what is important and what isn't. And that's a gift of menopause, which we all have to look forward to. So I've talked a bit about the inner critic, and I want to also refer to the inner wisdom keeper that we explored last night. So these 2 key inner archetypes that accompany us through the whole creative process, through all these phases. The inner critic is, as I said, most active in the discernment phase, just as it is most active in your inner autumn. And as well as the inner critic being challenging, the function is to mature our creative work. The function is to really grow it up and to evolve it, and also prepare us for the deep intimacy with our work or our creativity, whatever it is we're creating, when we reach the potentized phase. So if we can really work with this discernment phase consciously, we can then be available to this depth that comes at the potentized phase. Sometimes your inner critic might have you convinced that you are procrastinating when you're maybe just not where you thought you should be or thought you would be with a given project. And this is something I hear women share so often, that they're really beating themselves up for not having got on with stuff, not finished things, not have the results to show yet. And so often when we look a bit deeper together, what emerges is that it's just not the right phase right now. Sometimes we do procrastinate out of fear, and it is actually something we can blast through, but sometimes it's because we are not in an initiate or manifest phase. We're actually in another phase. where it might be more appropriate to slow down or let go. This is particularly so if your inner critic has a strong slave driver characteristic, which many of us have from if we experience childhoods where we were encouraged to base our worth on what we achieved, which is very many of us, I suspect. And we'll go more into this on Sunday and how to work constructively with this inner critic. And of course is the wisdom keeper, which is our inner coach and guide and motivator who helps us to see the good in our work, to help us to achieve and fulfill within the world and see our place in the world of what it is we're contributing and serving and to value that. And it's just as important to listen to this figure and hear what she has to say. So I hope this has been helpful for cementing your sense of these 4 phases, and that you can go forward into whatever you're creating with more understanding of where you're at and how to work with that phase, how to have more understanding and compassion for yourself in the process, and to time things according to your own rhythms.